Hello, Alex here, and in this video I want to talk about the Solinon Optik 18mm f5.6 aspherical, a new and very exciting ultra-wide angle lens for the Leica M mount that I have fallen completely head over heels for, both on film and digital. Let's get into it. I love ultra-wide angle photography, whether it's the 40mm dramatic square perspective on the Rolleiflex SL66 or the extreme wide-angle panorama of the 30mm lens on my X-Pan 2. I absolutely adore that style of photography. It doesn't work all the time, but I really do enjoy doing it. But in all my time using the Zeiss Icon, I've never picked up an ultra-wide angle lens for it. I've tried several, like 5 or 6 in M mount, and I've never committed to buying one, for various reasons. Calvin, the man behind the Solinon Optik brand, seems to have had pretty much the same concept of the perfect ultra-wide angle or UWA lens, and you can't stop me from saying it that way, as I did. And he simply designed it and had it made as one does. I've spoken with Calvin a bit over email and over Discord, but I do want to say that I purchased this lens with my own money the instant I saw Bastian's review over on philipreeve.net, which is something I'm going to refer to a bit in that video because he does a lot more technical testing that matches my experience with the lens, but aren't things that I've necessarily replicated myself, so I do strongly recommend checking out that review, which is linked in the video description down below. This Solinon lens is unique on the market in that nothing else out there brings all of the same qualities to the table. It is small, compact and lightweight. It is sharp both on digital and film. It is almost perfectly optically corrected for distortion. It has extremely well controlled vignetting with very even illumination across the frame, and it's an 18mm lens. Even forgoing that last one, there are very few lenses that meet all of those other criteria, and those that do often don't quite do so as well, or are significantly larger or more expensive, as we'll get to. Manufactured by Solinon Optik, the lens is about 55mm wide down most of the length of the barrel with a very slight taper. It sticks out about 36mm from the lens mount and extends by another 1mm on close focusing, weighing in at just 230 grams without a hood or caps. So this lens is bigger than the Voigtländer 15mm f4.5 Mark II, but that is an extremely small lens and kind of the default UWA lens for most people in M mount. This Solinon lens is smaller and lighter than pretty much every other competitor that is in the same kind of, tier or rank when it comes to optical quality. As a general comparison, if you remove the hood and lens cap, it's about the same size as the Voigtländer 35mm f1.4 Nocton with its own front cap installed. Inside the quite large but very well padded box, you get a copy of the user manual, which gives a bunch of technical information including the MTF chart and the like, and then the lens itself, of course, with a rear cap, square lens hood and a front cap for that square hood. The lens employs an all-metal construction including the lens cap and hood, aperture and focusing rings, the barrel and the lens mount with what appears to be a brass helicoid. The only bit of plastic you're getting here is the rear lens cap. As this is a prime lens, it doesn't zoom and it has a fixed focal length of 18mm, offering that extreme ultra-wide or UWA perspective, but without being so catastrophically wide as something like a 9 or a 14mm lens that becomes very difficult to use on an everyday basis. In 35mm terms, it's wider than most people are used to, so the best comparison I can give is that it's roughly equivalent to setting the wide-angle lens on your phone to 0.7 or 0.8x, depending on your specific phone cameras. It makes the most mundane subjects look quite interesting, and shots with a lens like this generally are going to get people's attention. And if you like the X-Pan look, 17mm is pretty much the perfect match for the X-Pan 30mm lens, so taking this Solinon 18mm and cropping it 65x24 gets you pretty damn close. The lens is fully rangefinder coupled from infinity down to 0.7 meters or 70 centimeters, but the lens can focus even closer down to 38 centimeters, albeit without rangefinder coupling either for live view use or use on a mirrorless camera. That gives you a reproduction ratio of like 1:37 with rangefinder coupling, or like 1:19 when using it in live view. So it's by no means a macro lens, but you can get decently close all the same for pretty solid dramatic perspectives. A lot of my close-ups, I should say, when I'm showing pictures in this video shot on digital are even closer because I'm using the Schoten LM to SE helicoid adapter, allowing me to extend the lens quite a bit more. The optical design consists of 9 elements in 7 groups, with 2 extra low dispersion ED elements and 2 aspherical elements without the use of any floating groups. The front of the lens has a metal 46mm filter thread, and Solinon recommend using slim filters to avoid vignetting. I'm not factually certain about the coating situation, and I forgot to ask Calvin before recording this, but given the range of colors I can see looking through the front element, as well as, spoiler, the incredible flare resistance of this lens, I'm very confident in saying it's almost definitely heavily multi-coated. The front of the lens also bears an outer thread mount for the screw-in lens hood, which does have a hard stop, so aligning the hood perfectly is never a problem. That hood does have a cutout to give you a bit more visibility, to reduce the viewfinder blockage somewhat, but I don't really find that particularly useful given that you're going to be using an external finder anyway, pretty much all the time. The aperture range starts from a conservative f5.6 and closes down to f22 in equally spaced half-stop increments. The diaphragm itself is made of 5 straight blades, meaning you can get 10 pointed sun stars at all apertures, even wide open. The focusing ring is engraved with painted markings in both metric and imperial, and with a comically broad depth of field scale. Missing focus at moderate distances with an 18mm f5.6 lens is honestly a challenge, but it is nice to know that both zone and scale focusing work extremely easily with this lens, assuming you don't just stick it at a hyperfocal distance for your chosen aperture. Unfortunately, the lens doesn't have an infrared focusing index though, which I would have liked to see because that becomes quite important with such a short focal length. You're not just going to be able to wing it like you might with a 50. The focusing ring turns very smoothly and slightly more heavily than some of my other lenses, turning about 60 degrees from infinity down to 70 centimeters and a further 60 degrees when focusing down to the minimum focusing distance. The focusing ring doesn't have like a tab or an infinity lock or a detent or soft stop at 70 centimeters, which is where the rangefinder coupling ends, and that's marked in yellow on the focusing ring, just to give you a quick reminder. The ring turns very slowly and smoothly with very high precision, making the rangefinder patch move very slowly when using my film camera, but when I'm using it on digital, I tend to actually just focus the lens using the helicoid adapter itself because the gearing, for lack of a better word, is more aggressive. The rear of the lens bears the Leica M mount. When mounting the lens to your camera, the flange on the mount will set up the frame lines in position 3. So if you set your frame line selector all the way in, that's what you're going to get. In my case, 28 and 85mm frame lines. For a lot of cameras, that's going to be like 28-90. Before getting into pros and cons, I want to quickly address some of the alternatives to this lens and its competitors, because I've been questioned on my decision to buy this a lot more than I expected. I have used some of these lenses, but by no means all of them, so take what I say with a grain of salt, and I'm just kind of comparing them at face value. The Zeiss Distagon 18mm f4 has 1/3 stop aperture clicks, which I absolutely hate. That's inconsistent with everything that I own, and has no aspherical elements, so optically speaking it lags quite far behind a lot of these lenses. The Leica 18mm f3.8 Super Elmar is of course faster, but much larger, needing 77mm filters via a special adapter ring, and of course it costs quite a lot more money. The Funleader 18mm f8 cap lens is fun, but it's ultimately a toy lens with a fixed f8 aperture and not a serious optic. It would be maybe okay on a film camera, it's not something I'm going to be using for architectural work on my Sony. And as an honorary 18mm lens, the MS Optics PERAR 17mm f4.5 is incredibly small, but has numerous problems with optical quality, except at the very narrowest apertures. It's basically only usable at f11 to 16, it's awful on digital sensors, and it has tremendous problems with vignetting. But it is tiny if that's what you want. On the other side, what about 15 and 21mm lenses? If I want a high-performing digital 15mm lens, I could get the Photoland 15mm Mark III, which is quite larger than the Mark II. Or if I wanted a faster aperture, I could go for something like the 21 f1.4 Nocton. But 15 and 21 just don't suit me. I've borrowed my friend Tom's 15mm quite a few times, and I just don't get on with it. I always end up cropping those shots in just a little bit, as it happens by about 15 to 20%, giving me an 18-ish mil field of view anyway. And I do have a 20 to 35mm lens in FD mount, and I borrowed Jason's 20 and 35 double prime Konica lens last year, and 20 just isn't quite wide enough for me a lot of the time, especially since I tend to crop either 4 to 3 or 16 to 9, especially for my ultra-wide stuff. So then I'm getting even tighter, more towards a 24mm field of view in terms of degrees of field of view. It just doesn't work for me. 18mm is just the sweet spot, in much the same way that I prefer 75mm to either a 50 or a 90. So for someone in that kind of space, this lens really stands out as a new high quality option. Oh, and if you're thinking about the 16mm hologon lens, you're probably not in a position where you're concerned about buying a lens like this one anyway. The lens costs just over €400, which is an extremely good price for an UA lens in this category anyway, but especially given its optical properties, that is an extraordinarily affordable price. And you have to consider as well that Solinon are a new brand and they're not going to be benefiting from the economies of scale of something like the Sina Voigtlander, so the cost of manufacturing is going to be higher. So that's extremely impressive. I mean, it's not just affordable, it's excellent value for money. Build quality overall is absolutely excellent. It's got very tight fit and finish, it looks good, it feels solid in the hand, there's nothing that's loose or wobbling. The only exception to this is the screw thread for the lens hood, which I hate the sound of. Not that I'm taking this off, because you don't get a pinchy lens cap, you only get the square lens cap with this thing. That's fine, but just listen to this. That metal on metal rubbing just isn't something I like, and it detracts from what is otherwise a very premium experience. This lens feels like it punches well above its weight, especially given the extensive use of metal. Doesn't affect the actual lens, and if you're not going to use it with the lens hood, it's not going to affect you. Aside from that, the build quality is top notch. Similarly, I mean, image quality is just amazing across the board. The lens is out-resolving any film that I might try and put through my Zeiss, and on digital, even with the worst case scenario of a Sony camera with its very thick sensor stack, it's very sharp out to almost the extreme corners where it does start to fall apart a little bit, but even then, much less so than competing lenses, especially the Voigtlander Mark II. The difference there is really, really significant. Field flatness is also another thing I've had no problems with. I mean, you're getting a ton of depth of field with an 18mm f5.6 anyway, even at relatively close distances, but I haven't noticed any problems with something like a mid-zone dip. Flare resistance is also incredible, and chromatic aberration, what chromatic aberration? The lens is just beautiful in those regards. It's just top tier. The physical design of the lens and the overall aesthetic I do find quite appealing. It's quite similar to a lot of the Voigtlander lenses, and I do find it quite ironic that this lens matches my Voigtlander 35 Nocton a lot better than my Voigtlander 50mm Nocton matches that 35mm lens. The level of inconsistency in the Sina Voigtlander lineup is quite hilarious, and that a third-party lens, which may or may not have been deliberately designed to look like this, matches or integrates more easily than some of their own lenses, is not lost on me. But the design is quite neutral in a sense. It's black with white and red. It's a simple kind of design. It doesn't stand out. I know things like the Typoc lenses can be quite polarizing for a lot of people. It's much more palatable and neutral. If we lump all of the 15 and 18mm lenses together into one pile and say that you could just crop in the 15mm field of view if you wanted to, like I've done before, we can say that this is the second smallest lens in that group, which is very impressive. The only smaller lens with high optical quality is the 15mm Voigtlander Mark II, and again, that lens sucks on digital formats. If it didn't, the Mark III wouldn't exist. But that's very important for me, because this lens being small and compact means I am more likely to bring it with me. My level of tolerance for a big and heavy lens directly corresponds to how likely I am to use it. Something like a fast 35 that's quite large, I would tolerate more than my fast 90, which I really don't like using, and I don't like bringing around because it's so heavy. This lens being small, especially compared to something like the Voigtlander 15 Mark III or the 21 f1.4 Nocton, which is a different beast but still very large, I wouldn't bring those with me all the time, whereas if I'm going out with a sling, I'm very happy to just throw this lens in the bag and have it in case I want to take a shot, which means I am using it more and doing more photography with it. Kind of as I get older, I'm leaning more towards smaller lenses that are easier just to have with me, even if it comes at the cost of maximum aperture, and this lens fits that bill perfectly. I already spoke about image quality, but I'd want to separately praise both distortion control and vignetting with this lens. These were covered in a bit more detail in Bastian's review, but everything he said I completely agree with. This lens is nearly completely optically corrected for distortion. In Lightroom, you can figure out a wavy mustache profile, blah blah blah, that's no problem. On film, you can't really do that. I notice a lot of problems with distortion with my 35 1.4 Nocton. That's a weakness of that lens, because I have the Mark II. But with this lens, it's not a problem. You're going to get perspective distortion, sure, that's part of the UA appeal, but barrel distortion, or somehow pincushion distortion maybe, are not problems here. Similarly, vignetting is extraordinarily well controlled. The small size does limit how good it can be, and you still have a couple of stops of vignetting out in the corners, but it's a lot more even across the frame than vignetting is with its competitors, especially the Voigtlander 15 Mark II, where that lens has about a stop and a half, 1 2/3 stops more vignetting than this lens. So even though that's an f4.5 lens, the overall net illumination across the frame is less. On a digital camera, you can bump up the shadows no problem. That's not been a problem for like the last 10 years, but trying to print in the dark room with heavy vignetting is really annoying, and lenses like this don't give you the option of something like a center filter like I have with the X-Pan 30mm to reverse vignette the center of the lens to match the vignette corners. And even if you had that option, that would turn an f5.6 lens into typically a T9 to T10 lens, costing you even more low light performance. So the fact that you don't have to worry as much about that, even if the performance isn't perfect, it's basically class leading and it deserves huge praise. You bet I get cozy when I'm editing these videos, but something I forgot to mention, given that I was trying to minimize scripting for this video, which went quite well, the minimum focusing distance is actually better than I, kind of initially thought. It is not a macro lens, like I said, not even close, and the Laowa lenses do get a lot closer, and the working distance at those kind of super short distances is very challenging. But this lens, compared to other M-mount lenses specifically, does perform very well, and to be honest, the decent depth of field you're getting at f5.6, or if you can stop down giving lighting conditions, means you can kind of just wing it sometimes. I have one shot I shot on film where I just guesstimated the distance and that worked out completely fine. Contextually, within the M mount, it is one of the better options in terms of close focusing performance, which will be more important if you're shooting on a digital M camera. And lastly, it's a small thing. If you're like me and you enjoy the 18mm focal length, having another option at all is fantastic, but having one that is such high quality is an absolute joy, again, especially considering the cost. In the context of the Leica M mount, f5.6 is a pretty modest aperture for an UWA lens. I mean, there are, again, extreme cases like the 21 1.4 Nocton, but in the 15 to 18 range, most of the lenses are like f4 to f4.5, f5.6. It's kind of on the slower end of normal. But in the mirrorless world, there are a lot of lenses that go quite a bit faster, like Laowa's 15mm f2, which was actually also recently released in Leica M mount, offer significantly faster apertures and in some cases quite closer focusing if that's really your goal. So if you're a dedicated mirrorless shooter, this might not be the best option for you, unless size is your biggest concern. But if you want, extreme close focusing or an extremely wide aperture, there might be better options out there, unless you're shooting a mix of M and mirrorless, or, like digital and film and M, in which case your options are a bit more limited and this stands out a bit more kind of contextually. As much as Calvin has been very kind to me with his time, and he was an absolute pleasure to deal with and very helpful when I had one problem on the Irish side with shipping that was nothing to do with him, Solinon Optik are a new and, strictly speaking, unproven brand at this point. They are very new. We don't know how the quality will hold up over time, if there will be issues that will pop up maybe in a year or 2 years' time, or how warranty support will go if people start to have problems, how these things will be handled. I don't have any reason not to trust Calvin or trust the brand, but I don't think it's fair for people to go and like blindly trust the brand either just because their first product has been so good. Unless you're going to commit to shooting in live view on a digital M, or if you're using it explicitly and solely on a mirrorless camera, you're going to need an external viewfinder because you're not going to have 18mm frame lines in your camera. And 18mm finders are a bit of a pain in the ass to get. Your best option, strictly speaking, is going to be the Zeiss 18mm finder, but that costs more than this lens does. In the end, I opted for one of the finders for the Epson RD1. This is the Voigtlander 12mm finder type D. So it's a 12mm finder for an APS-C camera, giving me an 18mm field of view. It cost me €90 shipped, so I'm more than happy to pay that, and I know that these Voigtlander finders work quite well with me with glasses. The frame line's nice and easy to see. But nevertheless, you're going to have to buy one, and it's not exactly easy. These things are not super common and easy to find. Getting a 15 or 21mm finder, that's easy. They're everywhere. 18mm, not so much. And lastly, it's very small and not really fair to have expected in the first place, but I thought given the amazing vignetting performance that this lens would have a huge image circle, and it doesn't. It does not cover the GFX or XCD sensor, which is something I imagine a lot of people are going to be curious about. It would have been nice if it covered the giant sensor, especially given its extraordinary performance on digital, and it does hold up very well on the GFX sensor, just without using the entirety of that sensor. So those are my thoughts on the Solinon Optik 18mm f5.6 aspherical lens. I honestly thought I would need a lot longer to kind of figure out the nuances and the nitty-gritty details of this lens. But no, everything is just self-evident and the lens really speaks for itself. Fantastic build quality, an extremely affordable price that undercuts many worse lenses on the market, extraordinarily optical quality on both film and digital, great close-up performance, incredible flare resistance, minimal optical distortion, very, very low vignetting. What more do you need from a lens? Okay, it doesn't have autofocus, but do you really need that with an ultra-wide lens, especially an f5.6? Probably not. If you have a specific need for your ultra-wide angle photography, like an ultra-wide angle, or like maybe you need a 14mm lens, or an extremely wide aperture for blurry backgrounds, or maybe you need a shift lens for architectural work. Fair enough. If you don't have any specific needs, or you just don't really care what kind of ultra-wide you get and you just want something that's really good, this is my most unreserved recommendation I've ever given a lens on the channel. It is stunning. I am so in love with it. I'm actually glad that I didn't ask for a review sample. I don't know if I would have got one anyway, because, well, aside from the fact I feel like I've got my money's worth, you can trust that I stand by what I'm saying because I paid for it with my own money. The lens is just absolutely stellar. I waited so long to find the perfect ultra-wide angle lens for both my film and digital cameras, and I finally found it. This is going to be such an asset to me going forward, especially when traveling. I really thought I'd have a lot more to say here, but I don't. It's incredible. The lens is just absolutely fantastic, and I'm really excited to see what Calvin comes out with next under the Solinon brand. That's all I have to say for today, so stay safe, and bye-bye for now. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Shaka1277 for new pictures every day. If you liked this video and enjoy what I do on the channel, please consider subscribing or checking out my Patreon, where the tiers start at just €1 per month.